What's the craziest butterfly effect that happened to you because of a small decision that you made? Story 1. My wife got an email from her old colleagues the day we returned home from our honeymoon asking if she wanted to star in a short film they were doing for fun. She said sure and asked if I could come along, as she knew I had an interest in movies, but at the time I worked in life insurance and was miserable. It was more than an interest. I had always wanted to make films but never made the right connections with people and didn't know where to start. I made friends with the producer of that short film my wife was in, and 11 years later, filmmaking and video production is my career. I've shot feature films, short films, and videos for TV and the web, and all over the world because of that one email to my wife. Changed our lives. Oh, and that original short film never got finished. I used to be a master degree nurse, working on a PhD, worked in pediatric oncology, ED, and burn ICU. A big pharmaceutical company funded the program within the university that I was attending, and they basically controlled what research could be done there. I was appalled. Eventually disheartened and decided to make a life change, as I am much a creative as a STEM guy. I'd published a bunch of short stories and a novel over the years, so I thought I might make a career in that direction. My wife worked in creative operations at a big TV network and was launching an international feed for a top 500 company. It was bizarre how by the seat of their pants underfunded and understaffed this place was. My wife was ready to quit. She knew some automation would help, but she didn't have time or the staff to code anything. I knew enough that I said I could help. So for free, I started coming in at night and on weekends with her, and we built a couple of databases and some automation tools. The big boss saw what we were doing, and so he told me that he would find some budget to pay me. I got a short contract. I never intended on staying. There's so much work that needed to be done that I was writing and producing spots within a week. They liked what I was doing, so I got brought in full time, paid my dues and got more and bigger projects, ended up being a showrunner on a popular show. Now I've done all kinds of producing from TV, film to advert games. I write screenplays and love my job, all because I wanted to help out. P.S. Having worked in nursing and on the research end, I'm 100% Medicare for all, financially, practically, and ethically. It's the only right choice, if health and fiscal responsibility are your goals. Same email story here. I'm from France, and I kind of wanted to move out of the country. When I finished my school, my ex told me, hey, there are people recruiting for some software devs in Quebec in the school mail. I was not checking it anymore as school was over. I applied and moved 3 months later with all expenses on them, immigration process and plane ticket. Been living there for 8 years now. Without this mail, I would have stayed in France because I would have been too lazy to actually try moving. I'm on my way to get my citizenship right now, and I'm super proud of it. Story 2. My husband, he found out after 18 years that his mom's side of the family was Spanish, not Mexican. He found this interesting and changed his country to Spain on MySpace instead of the US where he really was. Meanwhile, in Australia, I was helping my friend find Spanish people to add as a friend as she was learning the language. I came across my now husband and decided to send him a friend request as well. We got along really well and met in person after 3 years, have been together 11 years and married for 7. If he hadn't changed his country to Spain, and only for a day or so, we'd never know each other existed. 2.5 years ago, my brother told me to get Discord to talk with one of his friends about writing. I was really passionate about writing for a while, and so I got Discord and created an account. My bro convinced me also to write an intro on a server, and I never really used Discord again for the next 3 months. I was going to delete my account, but right before I got home and was gonna delete it, I randomly got a message from a stranger that thought my intro was interesting. LMAO, it wasn't. But I thought I'd humor him, and it turns out he wasn't a complete creep, and we started dating and are now married. This also helped me to get out of my toxic family and the pit I had been dug into with them. Me too. My friend had been dating and not having success. She thought maybe online dating would work, but didn't want to do it alone. I had just moved home and gotten out of a relationship and had no desire to date, so I said I'd join with her if it made her feel more comfortable and threw together a half-assed profile. The first day, a guy messaged me and asked to go on a date. I was surprised because he was from out of town, but had put his settings to 100 kilometers because he didn't want to date local girls. We met that week, and 6 years later we haven't stopped talking since that day. Married for 2 years now. Story 3. The first day I ever signed up for the internet back in 1999, I installed MIRC, because it was on the starter disk my ISP gave me, and joined a random chat room. Over the course of the next year, the regulars in that room became like family to me. We would talk about everything. All that practice made me a fast typist and way better communicator than I was before that. They would even help me when I had trouble understanding something in my college classes. I also met my husband in that room, and we've been happily married for 18 years. Others from our little IRC family are married too, and we still keep in touch, all because I randomly chose that chat room that day. Way back in the mid-90s, I joined Field and Stream's hunting forum. A few of us regulars clicked and formed our own little email group, and we still have about 8 of us who communicate regularly on our email group. We've used several different programs, even though we are all on Facebook now. I've known this group of people for 25 years and met almost all of them in person over the years, and sadly lost one to heart disease a few years ago. Having been there for the days of MIRC and modding in an IRC newbies channel, I can confirm that weddings took place, meets happened, we got close and involved in one another's lives. I also learned to type fast because of those chat rooms. You had to in order to keep up with the conversation, and that led to me getting a job in IT for 20 years. I did not keep in touch with my IRC family and still wonder how many of them are doing these days. I wish them all well. I joined a piracy channel I was randomly invited to on dal.net probably 17 or 20 years ago. I was probably 12. It was always populated with 20 to 30 users. It had bots set up for FTP and XDCC. This wasn't one of those huge channels with 90 Juarez bots, just a bunch of people. I spent every summer from the time I was 12 or 13 until 16 probably messing with MIRC coding and just being learning PC stuff. Unfortunately, life got away from me at 16. It still exists as Serious Traders on EFNet now. Only one person is ever there. I idle there sometimes. Last time I talked to the original founder was probably 12 years ago. I miss the good old days. Boy, do I miss it. Story 4. My existence. When my dad was about 20, he needed a phone number, so he called the operator from a payphone. She gave him the number. He hung up and she accidentally refunded the money back to the payphone. She called the payphone back and asked him if he could put the money back in, which he did and hung up again. She accidentally refunded the money again and had to call back again to ask him to put the money back in. He did and hung up again. She was so flustered, she refunded the money again and called back again, and my father got to chatting with her and got her number. They set up a date, which she stood him up for. Then she forgot his name when he called her again. Then they actually got coffee, and 4 years later were married. This coming August, it'll be 50 years for them. If my dad didn't need that phone number, I wouldn't be here. Mine is my existence too. Technically, I owe my entire life to George Brett, a famous baseball player for the Royals if you've never heard of him. He was getting inducted into the Hall of Fame, and so was Robin Yount, Brewers. My aunt and great uncle were there to see George Brett, and my dad's best friend was there to see Yount. The three of them randomly ended up sitting next to each other. My dad's best friend asked if they knew any pretty girls in Kansas City because his friend needed a girlfriend, and my aunt suggested her sister, my mom. They set my parents up on a blind date. They hit it off and got married, and now here I am thanks to the sport of baseball for making me alive. In some way, I think that this is actually the correct answer for every person who has ever lived, insofar as there can be a correct answer here. Since the number of things that had to happen, the number of small decisions that had to be made just for each of us to exist results in such infinitely small chances. We have all beaten insanely small odds just by being here. Think about how your dad's parents met, and your mom's, and theirs, and theirs, and theirs, and on and on and on. My dad almost went back to Scotland without ever meeting my mom, who was broke and had nowhere to live, and he convinced someone he knew to buy him a train ticket. When he got to the train station, though, he bumped into a guy who was trying to get money for a ticket to Glasgow. He sold him his ticket for what money this guy already had, and in a classy decision bought booze with the money. He ended up drinking with a random guy who lived in a block of flats on my mom's road and offered to let him crash there. One night he got locked out. His flatmate was passed out, not answering, and he had nowhere else to go. A group of teens was playing football outside the tower block, so he started kicking the ball about with them. He boots the ball, hit it wrong, it trails off towards a nearby alley, and when he runs over to get it, he literally runs into my mom. If he gets on the train, I don't exist. Drinks with any other guy, I don't exist. If he doesn't get locked out, I don't exist. Chooses not to play football with those kids, I don't exist. Kicks the ball the other way, I probably don't exist. Story 6. When I was in the 8th grade, 13 years old, I had a really long bus ride home, so I would pass the time by reading. One day, I faced the very serious situation of nothing to read and a minute to grab something in the library, and for whatever reason I grabbed a book on astronomy. That book was amazing and grabbed me like nothing else had before. I remember being excited to realize every astronomer on Earth was 13 years old once too, and that was a career you could actually do, even if you were from Pittsburgh. Anyway, today I am a professional astronomer who studies gigantic space explosions for a living. There was a lot of work to get from that moment to this one, but I'm always grateful that I picked up that library book. I hated reading when I was a kid, and my mom is an avid reader, so she was really upset that I didn't like it at all. We had mandatory library days in school, so I had to go and pick out a book from there. At first, I was reading books on whales and really loved it. We lived in Southern California, so my parents saved up and took me on a whale watching trip. I was puking the entire way apparently. I'm extremely seasick, so oceanography was off the list. I started picking up books on Earth, and it had sections on astronomy and the solar system. I saw those huge numbers, 93 million miles, 4 billion years, and I was hooked. I would read all about them. I went to visit a family in India in 7th grade, and out of boredom, I was rummaging around in the bedroom/study room cabinets. My uncle didn't like that I was poking around there, so he handed me a book to read to keep me occupied. It was by Stephen Hawking, Black Holes and Baby Universes. My mom came from outside and saw me just curled up in the bedroom with a book, practically on my eyeballs. I couldn't put it down. I read it in front, back, left, right, up, down, forwards, backwards, you name it. When I went back to visit my family last year, 20 years since my uncle had given me the book, I handed him my just obtained NASA government ID badge. Story 7. The other day, I was driving home from work. Traffic was light and I was behind a car with a number plate that started KFD. Decided to duck through the KFC drive-thru for chippies with extra salt as a little treat to myself. They took forever to bring them out, and by the time they finally did, all told about 10 minutes later, traffic had slowed to a complete halt. I need to get over a bridge that's normally 6 lanes, which has now been reduced to 1. Turns out it's due to a massive collision involving several cars. When I finally get to the point where I'm driving past, I notice the number plate on one of the cars, that same KFD number plate. If I hadn't stopped to get hot chips, I'm fairly sure I'd have been in a major collision. TLDR, KFC chippies with extra salt saved my life. Edit. Didn't think the chippies would be the most interesting thing in this post. For clarification, I'm Australian, Melbs, and calling them chippies instead of chips improves your quality of life. In Australia, at least. Try it and see. Just the other day, I was driving home from work with the intention of stopping at the mall near my house because I was craving a burger. I also remembered I needed to go to the store to pick up an order for my girlfriend, but it was in the complete opposite direction. I made the decision to pick up the order for her instead and then head home. Not even 10 minutes after that decision, I got a message from my friend that there was an active shooter at the mall and that it was being evacuated/surrounded by police. If it wasn't for my girlfriend's order, I would have been in the mall at the time of the shooter. Similar experience here, the car in front of me was going stupidly slow and kept missing opportunities to make his left at the lights, and the right lane was so full, I couldn't go straight through. There was a small break in oncoming traffic, so I made a left onto a small side street to take a longish detour to come to the other side of the intersection, to then take a left. As I was doing this, I realized it was stupid and I should have just been patient. When I got to the intersection though, the car had been smashed in a 4-vehicle pileup, including the vehicle that had been behind me. Story 8. I had to call my heart surgeon to give him my new insurance numbers. I had only just gotten them because the person who had them had the flu and was not getting back to me. As soon as I got my numbers, I called the surgeon. The receptionist said, "Oh, hey, we just had a cancellation for this Friday. Do you want it?" Of course I wanted it, to get it over with, and not wait another month. Decided to take that open heart surgery canceling appointment. A month before my actual appointment. And, well, the surgeon said that thank goodness I did because once he got a look inside, he realized I would not have survived to the original appointment date. So if the insurance lady didn't have the flu, I would have gotten those numbers a lot sooner and never gotten the offer to have the surgery when I did. Someone else's flu saved my life. Similar here. I was having seizures, no history of epilepsy, so I went to the ER 3 times. Really crappy public hospital, and they just turfed me out with some benzos cause I'm an alcoholic. Went to a GP believing what the ER said and asked for a script for Valium to get off the booze. She screamed at me out of her clinic, accusing me of drug seeking, more addiction prejudice. I was going to just forget about it and try to sober up, but walked past another clinic on my way home and decided to try another doctor. He checked out my symptoms and had me in an MRI the next day, where we discovered my 5.1 centimeter brain tumor, glioblastoma. Have had 2 surgeries since, chemo, radiation, the works, and am stable. That GP saved my life. So if I hadn't been kicked out by the lady doctor and walked home through a shady part of town, my GP has many addict patients and knows how to treat them. I wouldn't be alive right now. Those heart surgeons, man. When I was 12, going in for my second open heart surgery, my parents were worried as hell, as I had been lagging further and further behind my peers. Long story short, the surgeon says he's surprised I hadn't died and said I should be at least 6 months sooner. They told my parents this during or immediately after the surgery. Needless to say, they broke down sobbing, but were relieved, of course. Story 9. I was given 2 start dates for an entry-level job in a large organization. The date I chose to start led to working in a small but high-profile team, so I got lots of exposure with senior management, and I became the can-do guy who'd fix a million tiny problems. That recognition led to promotions, a fantastic career, further professional qualifications, and working overseas for several years. I also met my best friend and my partner. If I'd chosen the other date, I'd have been sent to a data processing pool and been fairly anonymous. Edit. I can't believe I'm actually writing this because, in my many throwaways, I got at least 100 upvotes. That said, OMG. When I posted this earlier, I didn't expect anything like the reaction. With the upvotes, comments, and kind awards, I think I've replied to everyone and I've read all of your stories and personal experiences, even the people who sub-posted mean comments. I know you're better than silly trolling. There are so many wonderful stories I've had a massive grin reading through them. If you've posted, I have imagined whole lives rich in joy for you. There are also some stories about people struggling through no fault of their own. To them, I would say please don't give up. It can seem reading these comments that everyone else got ahead in life, but that's only part of the story. Behind every success, there's a lifetime of wrong turns and what could have beens. I've had more than a few bumps in the road, and I expect many more lies in the future. You may be down, but you are not out. Thank you again so much for reading and sharing. I so wish I could meet you all in real life and raise a glass together. You're all such extraordinary, wonderful people. I interviewed with and received offers from 2 different teams at the same company when I was graduating. Team A was for OS level stuff that sounded mundane, arcane, and anonymous. Team B was for flashy application level stuff that sounded super cool. Manager A seemed like a really nice down-to-earth guy. Manager B seemed fake and like a salesman. I picked Team A because I figured I could do whatever work, but I thought life would be better with Manager A. 3 weeks later, Team B was eviscerated, almost all of them, as part of a company-wide 20% layoff, whereas on Team A, we only lost 1 out of our 12 team members because our product was more core and essential. I worked 5 years in that group on boring stuff, but in a chill atmosphere with people I liked. Manager A and I both got laid off in the same round, my 9th at that company in 5 years. He's a good guy, and I don't regret it. I have a similar career trajectory. I was a college undergrad in my first week of classes. There were these flyers around advertising to volunteer to help out a grad student, so I thought, what the heck, I'll go try it out, since it was in the field that I was interested in. I went there and met 3 students and this professor. One of the students would end up becoming my good friend and we'd rent a house together later on. One of the funniest places I ever lived. The other ended up getting me a job, working with her out in the field. The professor would encourage me to do a whole follow-up project once the first student graduated, since I now had experience in it, and so I took on the main role on this project way earlier than any of my peers who were working on anything similar, which later gave me credentials to be accepted to go live and work at the scientific field station, which the professor was the one who brought that place to my attention, the experience of which taught me a whole new discipline which I'm now doing a PhD in, and all these good experiences I had in my undergraduate years looked good enough on paper for me to get this fellowship funding source that's funding it for me. Looking back, literally all of it traces back to responding to that flyer in my first week of college. And it wouldn't have happened otherwise because through my whole whole experience there, I never ran into any of those students or professors outside of the events that sprung from that. One afternoon of going to try out something new shaped my whole college experience and subsequent career path. Story 10. I was always super flirty with the girl from HR, but we were always seeing other people, / don't date at work, so when she left the company, I was bummed. A year or two later, a coworker asked me to search my email archives. That was a thing back then, for something he needed. I ended up stumbling across the farewell to my work friends email from the HR girl, and she sent it from her personal email address. I reached out to her, we had coffee, then a date, then many dates, then I love yous, and I put a ring on it ASAP. 12 years later, extremely happily married, 2 goofy kids, 2 evil cats, and she still puts up with my BS. Story 11. Out of university, looking for a job, and exhausting all the online resources, on a whim I looked in the career section of a print newspaper that was lying around in the house. We never subscribed to that paper, I don't know why it was even there. Got a job in a different city, met someone who is now one of my best friends who introduced me to their friends, who introduced me to their friends, and so on until I was eventually introduced to my wife. If I'd found a job where I actually planned on working, there is absolutely no way I would have crossed paths with any of these people. Similar situation, I just finished grad school and was looking for a teaching job. I got a bit of a late start, but was going through a headhunter agency. I originally had plans to move to the Pacific Northwest, but ended up getting a left field phone call from a school in Kentucky. They flew me out the next day and I interviewed, getting the job. 2 weeks later, I packed a U-Haul to move away from home for the first time in my life. I was going to room with a colleague who was moving back to town and wanted to live in a hipster part of town, but we decided to go our own ways. But I liked the neighborhood across town from work. I found an apartment I liked, and am moving in with another colleague's help when I get introduced to a woman who he works with at the school. Turns out she's my upstairs neighbor. We start carpooling and she sets me up on dates with her friends, but I ultimately decide against my better judgment about dating colleagues that I should ask her out. That was 18 years and 2 kids ago. All of that is because I decided to take an interview going east instead of west. Story 12. 4 years ago, a kid I barely knew from school invited me to Six Flags. I was a bit of a loner at the time and I heard rumors about this kid being weird, so I intended to not go. On the day he wanted me to go, I was feeling extra bored and decided on a whim, why not? So I went and met this kid and 2 of his friends I'd never met at Six Flags. 4 years later, and that kid is my best friend, and I have 3 other very close friends that I met through him. Not only that, but I also met my first girlfriend because of the connections some of my new friends had. It transformed my high school years from being alone to having an amazing group of friends I could do almost anything with. I intended to ask my best friend to be my best man one day, and I don't intend on ever getting out of touch with any of them. I'm home from college now, and we are going to have a lot of fun together. Best decision I've ever made. Your story is oddly similar to mine at the beginning of college. They set up all different activities that you could sign up for and spend time with other new incoming freshmen. I forget how I linked up with this certain group, but I think I just met someone and we were friendly, so I just ended up with their group. Everyone was super nice, and given that Six Flags has the worst lines, there's a lot of time to talk. I got to meet some cool people and enjoyed my day immensely. Fast forward to today, the one person I don't remember being there but remembers me is one of my absolute best friends. 7 years now, and I still laugh at how I don't remember meeting her that day. Story 13. The older I get, the more I am constantly cognizant of the vast cascade of seemingly insignificant decisions and actions that led me to where I am. For example, a decision 25 years ago to change a refrigerator light bulb before going out resulted in my being at the wrong time and place so as to get mugged, which resulted in my decision to move out of the city that I had been living in, which resulted in my meeting my wife, and from there to have all my kids, and the whole shebang. I would have had a different whole shebang had I not changed that light bulb that afternoon, but the path to the present leads through that, and 1,000 other similarly trivial decisions. There's a Jewish saying, "What has God been up to since finishing creation? Making matches." In other words, setting up all the improbable coincidences that lead people like you to your intended goal. Alternatively, it refers to God directing the infinity of parallel universes that are created every instant, by every fluctuation from the quantum level up. But that's my reinterpretation and a topic for a different thread. I've thought about this a lot before, myself. About 17 years ago, I quit a job that was causing me a great deal of stress. We had recently moved, to a new apartment. A friend and I decided to run down to the convenience store down the street, which happened to be next to a biker bar that had a sign advertising karaoke on Wednesdays, which was the next day. We decided to go back the next day and try it out. Decided I liked it and the people in the neighborhood so much that I'd applied to the convenience store next door. Several years later, that convenience store, a small local chain, bought itself out and became 100% employee-owned. Several years after that, about 13.5 working there altogether, we sold out to a bigger chain and all got our cut as co-owners. It wasn't exactly enough to retire off of, but last spring we were able to use a chunk of that money to make a nice down payment on our first house. We've always been pretty solidly lower middle class people. An old friend jokingly referred to the group of us as upper lower class, and being broke is expensive. We scraped by, but I don't know if we would have ever been in a position to save up enough to do that if we hadn't moved to that apartment, down the street from that bar, next door to that convenience store at the time when I wound up needing to find a new job. There were a couple of times when I was so frustrated with them that I actively looked for other jobs, but stuck it out and stayed. There was once during that time that I had the opportunity to make a drastic move, over 600 miles in several states away, and I turned it down. At the time, I didn't know if I would come to regret that decision. It was difficult to make with a lot of pros and cons. Turns out it may have been for the best, although I suppose time will tell. Story 14. I was going to carpool with my aunt to a family gathering. At the last minute, I decided to go by myself so I could leave early if I wanted. It was a ways out of town and I didn't want to be stuck there. On the way there, she drove off the road and into a ditch. She was okay, but the passenger side of her car was totally smashed in. Similar story, I lived in a small town and was set to drive an hour and a half with friends to see a play in a larger nearby city. I had plans for a few weeks. The morning of, my mom woke up and said she had a bad dream that she couldn't remember, but she had a horrible gut feeling and decided I wasn't allowed to go. Argued with her for over an hour, but I was a teenager and couldn't really go against her. My friends showed up to get me and tried to convince Mom. No go. Mom trusts her gut. My two friends left. On the way to the play, they get in an accident that smashes the back half of the car. They're relatively unharmed, but the back seat, where I would have been, was wrecked. Maybe they wouldn't have been there at the time if I had been in the car, but who knows? Solidified my mom's trust in her gut feelings. Story 15. I have one for another person. In 2014, I was coaching my twins' male and female rec flag football game. My oldest player has a younger sister who came to watch practice. We will call her Grace. She saw my daughter on the team, told her dad, "There's a girl on that team," and the next week, she was on my roster. She and my daughter became fast friends. While the flag football season was wrapping up, I was putting together my roster for the upcoming rec volleyball team. At the end of one of my practices, my daughter invited Grace to play on the volleyball team together. Grace had played the previous season and not cared for it much. Grace agreed and played from rec to club, then to high school with my daughter. My daughter, who graduated last year, and I watched Grace as captain lead her team to a state championship, and she has a D1 scholarship for volleyball next fall. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.